The crack of gunfire echoed across the Precision Elite shooting range as a woman in simple jeans and a navy cardigan walked through the entrance. In a sea of tactical gear and expensive equipment, Eleanor Ellie Morgan might as well have been wearing a neon sign that read, "Civilian." Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, not a hint of makeup on her face, nothing like the polished professionals who dominated the prestigious shooting competition. Then came the moment that silenced everything. The mocking laughter that had followed her throughout the day died in their throats, and Commander Briggs's arrogant face turned ashen white. The man who had called her a little impurity in the diamond of my class now faced a terrifying truth. The weakest person in the room had just become the strongest. Ellie stood, trembling yet resolute in her plain clothes amidst that sea of expensive tactical gear. Her bullet had pierced the absolute center of a target from a distance where a former Navy SEAL had just failed. The electronic scoreboard flashed with results that defied explanation, a perfect shot that professional snipers spent careers trying to achieve. "Impossible!" someone whispered from the crowd. The word rippled through the stunned onlookers, gaining momentum as it traveled. Briggs stared at the target, his jaw clenched so tight a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. This wasn't supposed to happen. This woman, this nobody, had just outshot him in front of his peers, his students, his entire world. Beginner's luck, he managed to spit out, though his voice lacked conviction. The excuse hung hollow in the air, fooling no one. An older man with weathered features pushed forward through the crowd. Unlike the others, his expression showed no surprise, only quiet recognition. "That wasn't luck," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent range. "That was the Ghost's technique. Have you ever witnessed that powerful moment when arrogance is silenced? When someone underestimated rises to reveal their true strength? What follows is a story of justice, long delayed, but finally served. A reminder that true worth often hides in plain sight. Perhaps in your own life you've been underestimated, or witnessed someone rise above cruel judgment. This story might just inspire you to recognize the hidden strength within yourself and others." Ellie Morgan, 35 years old and a military widow, had approached the Precision Elite shooting range with her heart pounding against her ribs that morning. She wasn't there on a whim or for recreation. She had come seeking justice for a betrayal that had cost her everything. A betrayal orchestrated by the very man who now stared at her with dawning horror. The sleek glass entrance had reflected her modest appearance earlier that day. Faded jeans, simple navy sweater, and worn sneakers. A stark contrast to the tactical gear-clad men streaming in and out of the facility. Her fingers had instinctively reached for the wedding ring hanging from a chain around her neck, a habit formed in the years since Nathan's death. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly manicured nails and an expression that suggested she had already assessed Ellie's worth based on her appearance, had barely looked up from her computer. "First-timers go to the beginners area," she'd said, with a dismissive wave toward a small section cordoned off from the main range. As she made her way to the beginners area, Ellie felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her back. A group of men in expensive-looking gear huddled near the advanced shooting stations, their laughter barely contained as they glanced in her direction. One of them, a tall man with a physique that suggested regular gym sessions, whispered something that made the others burst into laughter. What no one knew as Ellie stepped onto that range was that her trembling wasn't from fear. It was from the rush of buried memories flooding back. Memories of desert operations, impossible shots taken under enemy fire, and the code name that had once been whispered with awe in classified briefings. The ghost had returned, and Commander Briggs's reckoning had only just begun. The Hawthorne Shooting Club was not a place for people like Ellie Morgan. Its mahogany-paneled walls and crystal chandeliers seemed to sneer at her simple white uniform as she trailed behind Commander Briggs and his elite students. Ellie kept her eyes down as she walked, feeling the stares of the club members who clearly wondered what business a woman like her had in their sacred space. "Stay with the beginners," Briggs instructed, his tone clipped and dismissive. "Don't wander around. This isn't a place for, well, just stay with the beginners." His voice carried the unmistakable note of someone who had long ago decided his own superiority. As Briggs walked away to join his group of similarly well-dressed men at the far end of the club, Ellie methodically observed and catalogued every detail of the facility. The layout, the exit points, the security cameras positioned in the corners. Years of training had made observation second nature, though no one watching would have noticed the calculated way she assessed her surroundings. Commander Briggs entered the range with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. His back was ramrod straight, his salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp in a military cut that he had maintained long after leaving active service. The Navy SEAL trident tattooed on his forearm was partially visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve, a not-so-subtle reminder of his elite status. "Welcome to Precision Elite," he announced to the new group, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Some of you will excel here. Others—" His gaze lingered on Ellie, eyes narrowing slightly. "Others might find that this isn't the right environment for them, and that's okay. Not everyone is cut out for this level of training." The introductory session began with each participant demonstrating their baseline skills. As the others took their turns, displaying varying degrees of proficiency, Ellie observed and mentally catalogued their techniques, their strengths, their weaknesses. When her turn came, Commander Briggs handed her the heaviest handgun available, a clear attempt to set her up for failure. "Let's see what you can do with this," he said, not bothering to hide the smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The weapon felt familiar in Ellie's hands, despite the years that had passed since she had last held one like it. For a moment, memories threatened to overwhelm her. The weight of responsibility, the missions in the dead of night, the lives that had depended on her steady hand. But now was not the time for those memories to surface. As Ellie raised the gun, her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the rush of buried memories flooding back, bringing with them the whispered promise she had made at her husband's grave. The truth will come to light. She could almost feel Nathan's presence beside her, hear his calm voice guiding her, as it had during their training years ago. But instead of embracing the skill that had once made her a legend, she deliberately misaligned her stance, tensed her shoulders, and allowed the recoil to throw off her aim. The bullet hit the outer ring of the target, drawing snickers from the onlookers. Commander Briggs shook his head, his contempt evident. "Maybe try knitting instead," he suggested, eliciting laughter from the group. Ellie accepted the humiliation with a meek nod, but behind her downcast eyes, a fire burned. This was just the beginning. 6 years earlier, First Lieutenant Eleanor Morgan had been known by another name in classified military circles, the Ghost. An elite sniper whose identity was concealed not just for operational security, but because the brass wasn't ready to acknowledge that one of their most effective operators was a woman. Her face always covered during missions, her service record heavily redacted, Ellie had accepted the shadows as the price for serving her country. Her husband, Nathan, a respected tactical specialist, had been one of the few who knew her real identity, and together they had formed an almost unstoppable team until that fateful mission in northern Afghanistan. The memories came flooding back as Ellie drove home from the shooting range, the weight of the day's charade heavy on her shoulders. In her mind, she could still see the mountainous terrain of Afghanistan, feel the biting cold as she positioned herself on the ridge overlooking the target area. Nathan and his team, including a younger Lieutenant Briggs, were to infiltrate a compound suspected of housing high-value intelligence. Ellie's job was to provide overwatch, to be the guardian angel that eliminated threats before they could reach the team on the ground. Everything had proceeded according to plan until the moment Briggs deviated from the established protocol, ignoring Nathan's warning about an uncleared sector. "I make the calls here," Briggs had snapped over the comms. "Just because you're married to the ghost doesn't make you untouchable." What followed was a cascade of catastrophic decisions. When the team came under unexpected fire, Briggs had a choice: hold position with Nathan, who had been hit, or retreat to save himself. The official report stated that the team had been separated during the firefight, that Briggs had attempted to render aid but was driven back by overwhelming enemy force. But Ellie, watching through her scope from her position on the ridge, had seen the truth. She had seen Briggs hesitate, look at Nathan's wounded form, and then turn away, leaving him exposed to the approaching enemy fighters. She had eliminated as many threats as possible, but there were too many, and by the time extraction arrived, Nathan had bled out on the cold ground. His last words, transmitted through their private channel: "Make sure the truth comes out, Ghost. Don't let them bury it with me." Ellie had tried to pursue justice through official channels, submitting her account of the events to the inquiry board, but Briggs, with his impeccable record and powerful connections, had discredited her testimony, suggesting that grief had clouded her judgment. The inquiry had cleared him of any wrongdoing, and he had gone on to receive commendations for his heroic efforts during the failed operation. Nathan's sacrifice had been reduced to a footnote, his warning about proper clearing procedures dismissed as irrelevant. As Ellie pulled into her driveway, she noticed her daughter's light still on despite the late hour. 12-year-old Sophia was waiting up, worry etched on her young face that bore such a striking resemblance to Nathan's. "How was it?" Sophia asked, trying to sound casual but unable to hide her concern. Ellie managed a smile, shielding her daughter from the storm raging inside her. "Educational," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "I met someone I used to work with." Sophia's eyes widened with interest. "Was it someone who knew Dad?" she asked, the question piercing straight to the heart of the matter. Ellie hesitated, the weight of the past and the potential consequences of what she was considering pressing down on her. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, someone who was with him on his last mission." She didn't elaborate further, and Sophia, perceptive beyond her years, didn't push. Instead, she hugged her mother tightly, as if trying to absorb some of her pain. "Dad always said you were the strongest person he knew," she whispered, "not just because of what you could do, but because of who you are." In that moment, Ellie made her decision. The truth that had been buried with Nathan deserved to see the light of day, not for revenge, but for justice, for all those who had been underestimated, overlooked, and abandoned. The following week found Ellie returning to Precision Elite, her demeanor carefully calibrated to project the image of a determined but struggling novice. She had spent the intervening days researching the facility and its staff, learning that Commander Briggs had transformed his military connections into a lucrative business catering to wealthy civilians and private security firms. His classes were exclusive, his methods supposedly based on SEAL training principles, and his reputation in the civilian shooting community was nearly mythical. People paid thousands of dollars for the privilege of being berated by him, believing that his harsh methods would transform them into elite operators, completely unaware that the man they idolized had abandoned his own teammate to die. As Ellie made her way to the beginner section for her scheduled lesson, she noticed a man working quietly on a rack of rifles in the maintenance area. Unlike the other staff who wore branded Precision Elite polos, he was dressed in worn jeans and a faded plaid shirt, his right arm moving with slightly limited mobility. Their eyes met briefly, and something in his gaze suggested recognition, not of her face, but perhaps of something more fundamental. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, before returning to his work. The lesson proceeded much as the introduction had, with Briggs paying minimal attention to the beginners group, occasionally barking corrections from across the range as he focused on his advanced students. Ellie continued her charade, showing just enough improvement to avoid being dismissed outright, but remaining firmly in the category of hopeless amateur. After the session, she lingered, meticulously cleaning up her station, while observing Briggs holding court with a group of admirers. Among them was Blake Donovan, the CEO of a tech security firm and Briggs's star pupil, whose arrogance was matched only by his apparent wealth, displayed in his custom firearms and designer tactical gear. "Excuse me," a quiet voice interrupted her observations. The maintenance man had approached, keeping his voice low. "You're holding that gun like someone trained to use it, not like someone learning to use it." His statement was matter-of-fact, without accusation, but leaving no room for denial. Ellie tensed, her mind racing through possible responses and exit strategies. "I'm Travis Wilson," he continued, extending his hand. "I was a ranger before this." He gestured to his right arm, where Ellie now noticed the subtle scarring that suggested significant reconstructive surgery. "Now I just keep the hardware running here." Ellie shook his hand cautiously, noting the calluses that spoke of years of weapons handling despite his injury. "Eleanor Morgan," she replied, using her real name despite her instinct to provide an alias. Something about his direct approach suggested that dishonesty would be futile. Travis nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Thought it might be you," he said enigmatically. "You wouldn't remember me. I was part of a joint op in Kandahar 2016, extraction team. You were already gone by the time we arrived, but I saw what you'd done from nearly a mile out. 9 hostiles, 9 headshots. They called you the Ghost." The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, the bustle of the range fading into the background as Ellie processed his words. For years, she had lived with the knowledge that her service record had been classified, her identity protected to the point that even most of the people she had saved had never known her name or gender. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said, the denial automatic and unconvincing even to her own ears. Travis smiled sadly, understanding in his eyes. "Maybe. But whoever you are, you're not what you're pretending to be, and neither is he." His gaze shifted meaningfully toward Briggs. "I was there that day too, in Afghanistan, when your husband was left behind." The revelation hit Ellie like a physical blow. Travis had been there, had seen what had happened, had perhaps been one of the extraction team that had retrieved Nathan's body. "He's been riding that reputation for years," Travis continued, his voice hardening. "Built this whole place on the myth of the hero who tried to save his team against impossible odds. Some of us know better. But speaking up against a decorated SEAL is career suicide, especially with my medical discharge already raising questions about my stability." His bitterness was palpable, the frustration of carrying a truth that no one wanted to hear. As they spoke, Ellie noticed Briggs watching them, his expression darkening at the sight of his maintenance man engaged in extended conversation with the struggling beginner he had dismissed so thoroughly. "McClellan looks like we've attracted attention," she murmured. Travis glanced over his shoulder and grimaced. "That's my cue to get back to work, but if you're serious about improving, the range is technically closed on Sunday evenings for maintenance. I'm usually here alone. No cameras on those nights either. Budget cuts, you know." He moved away, returning to his workbench with a casualness that belied the significance of what he had just offered. Private access to the facility, away from prying eyes. Later that evening, after the range had cleared and the lights in the main area had dimmed, a solitary figure moved through the shadows of the shooting lanes. The sound of perfect shots rang out in the emptiness, each one a testament to years of training and natural talent that had been hidden away for too long. For the first time in years, Ellie allowed herself to be the Ghost again, if only for a few hours in the darkness. News of an upcoming shooting competition spread through Precision Elite like wildfire, creating a buzz of excitement among the regular members. It wasn't just any competition. It was Commander Briggs' Invitational, an exclusive event where participation alone was considered a mark of status in the civilian shooting community. The prize was coveted: personalized training with Briggs himself and introductions to his network of private security firms and military contractors. For Ellie, it represented a public stage where the truth might finally be revealed. Blake Donovan had taken to holding court near the advanced shooting stations, his custom Sig Sauer P320 with gold inlaid slide, an ostentatious display of wealth that matched his personality. "The competition is really just a formality," he announced to anyone within earshot. "Briggs already knows who the best shooter is." His sycophants laughed on cue, their expensive gear and practice stances marking them as members of the elite circle that had formed around Donovan and, by extension, around Briggs. Men who had never faced actual combat, but spoke about tactical scenarios with the confidence of seasoned veterans. From her position in the beginner's area, Ellie could observe without being noticed. A skill she had honed during years of operations, where blending into the background had often meant the difference between mission success and failure. She had continued her charade of gradual, modest improvement, enough to justify her continued presence at the range, but not enough to attract undue attention. Travis had kept his distance during regular hours, their unspoken agreement to maintain appearances preventing any interaction that might raise suspicions. During one of their clandestine sessions, Travis had shared more about his own history with Briggs. Nathan called him out once, questioned a decision that put the team at unnecessary risk. Briggs never forgot it. "I think that's why, when the moment came..." Travis had left the sentence unfinished, but Ellie had nodded, understanding the implication. Nathan's death hadn't been a simple battlefield abandonment. It had been the culmination of a festering resentment. A deliberate choice made in a split second that had altered the course of multiple lives. The announcement of the competition's participants came on a Tuesday morning, posted on the large digital display in the Rangers lobby. As expected, Donovan's name topped the list, followed by other premium members. What was unexpected was the inclusion of several wildcard entries, individuals selected by Briggs himself to round out the field. And there, at the bottom of the list, was Eleanor Morgan, beginner class. The inclusion was met with disbelief and derision from the regular members, many of whom had never bothered to learn her name despite her weeks of consistent attendance. "This has to be a joke," Donovan declared loudly when he saw the list. "Is Briggs trying to provide comic relief?" His followers laughed on cue, several of them casting amused glances in Ellie's direction as she stood quietly reviewing the announcement. She maintained her expression of mild surprise while inwardly calculating what this development meant for her plans. Briggs had included her, but why? Was it simply to humiliate her publicly? To use her as an example of why certain people didn't belong in his world of tactical shooting? Her questions were answered when Briggs himself approached her later that morning, his posture radiating the same arrogant confidence that had characterized his interaction with Nathan years before. "Morgan," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "You made the list. Surprised?" Ellie nodded, projecting appropriate humility and confusion. "I don't understand, Commander. I'm barely hitting the target consistently. There must be others more deserving." Briggs smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. Everyone loves an underdog story. And sometimes it's good to remind the advanced students that they are not as special as they think they are. Even a beginner can get lucky occasionally. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, but beneath it, Ellie detected something else, a hint of the same cruelty that had shown through when he'd abandoned Nathan, a desire to put those he considered beneath him in their place through public humiliation. In the final practice session before the competition, Ellie allowed herself to show marginally more improvement, hitting closer to the center of the targets with greater consistency, but still maintaining the slight hesitation and imperfect stance that marked her as an amateur. It was enough to make Donovan take notice. After she finished, he approached, invading her personal space with the entitlement of someone unaccustomed to boundaries. "What's your game, Morgan?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. Nobody improves that quickly without prior experience. Ellie maintained her facade of intimidated confusion. "I'm just practicing a lot," she said, taking a small step back, "and watching the advanced class when I can." Donovan wasn't satisfied. Briggs might be playing his little inclusion game, but I've built my business identifying threats, and something about you doesn't add up. He leaned closer, his breath hot with anger. I don't know what your angle is, but tomorrow I'm going to put you in your place in front of everyone. You don't belong here with the professionals, and by the time I'm done, everyone will know it. As he stalked away, Ellie allowed herself a small hidden smile. Donovan's arrogance was making him careless, pushing him to public declarations that would make his eventual defeat all the more satisfying. The morning of the competition dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed at odds with the tension building within the walls of Precision Elite. The range had been transformed for the event, with bleachers installed for spectators, professional lighting rigs enhancing visibility, and a sophisticated electronic scoring system that would track each competitor's performance in real time. The parking lot was filled with luxury vehicles, Range Rovers, Mercedes G-Wagons, and even a few Maseratis, reflecting the affluent clientele that made up Briggs's core business. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, a buzz of anticipation filling the air as competitors checked their equipment and spectators found their seats. Briggs stood at the center of it all, resplendent in a custom-tailored shooting jacket emblazoned with the Precision Elite logo and his seal trident. He was in his element, moving from group to group, offering last-minute advice to some and friendly banter to others. Every inch, the legendary warrior turned benevolent mentor. It was a masterful performance, Ellie had to admit, watching from the periphery as she quietly prepared her borrowed equipment. As Ellie checked the sights on her assigned rifle, she became aware of an unfamiliar presence watching her. A distinguished older man in a perfectly pressed suit stood a few feet away, his bearing unmistakably military, despite the civilian attire. Their eyes met, and a flash of something, recognition perhaps, passed over his weathered features before he nodded slightly and moved toward the VIP section. It was only when Travis appeared briefly at her side, ostensibly to check her equipment, that the mystery was solved. "Colonel Marshall is here," Travis murmured, adjusting a scope that needed no adjustment. "Former commander of the Joint Special Operations Task Force, retired now, but still has connections all over the military community." Ellie's heart rate increased slightly, the implications clear. Colonel Marshall would have had access to the classified reports from the Afghanistan mission, would have seen both the official account and perhaps some of the conflicting evidence that had been suppressed. "Does he know Briggs?" she asked quietly. Travis nodded. "They go way back. Marshall was his commanding officer for a while, but there's been talk that they had a falling out after what happened with Nathan." The format was structured as a series of increasingly difficult challenges, beginning with basic marksmanship and progressing through various scenarios. Competitors would be eliminated after each round, with only the top performers advancing. Ellie took her place at the assigned station, aware of the dismissive glances and barely concealed smirks from the other competitors. Donovan, positioned several stations away, made a show of ignoring her entirely, his focus ostentatiously directed toward the more worthy opponents. Accuracy at various distances with a standard handgun, Ellie carefully calculated her performance, hitting within the acceptable scoring rings but avoiding the perfect center shots that would have raised suspicions. It was enough to advance her to the next round, though her score placed her near the bottom of the qualifying competitors. Donovan, as expected, performed brilliantly, his years of training and expensive equipment giving him a significant edge over many of the others. By the fourth round, only 8 competitors remained, including Ellie and Donovan. It was here that Briggs introduced an unexpected twist. "For this challenge," he announced, "we'll be testing not just skill, but adaptability. Each competitor will be using an unfamiliar weapon system with minimal preparation time. True operators must be able to function effectively with whatever tools are available to them in the field." The change clearly disadvantaged those who had trained exclusively with their preferred equipment, but it played directly into Ellie's strength. Her experience had included proficiency with virtually every weapon system used by American forces. As luck, or perhaps deliberate planning, would have it, Ellie was assigned a specialized sniper rifle similar to the one she had used during her classified operations. When her turn came, she approached the station with appropriate caution, examining the weapon as if unfamiliar with its components. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Travis watching intently, a subtle frown forming on his face. When she raised the rifle to take her first shot, she immediately realized something was wrong. The scope had been deliberately misaligned, ensuring that following the standard sighting procedure would result in failure. In that moment, Ellie faced a decision that would alter the course of everything that followed. She could maintain her cover, take the sabotaged shots, and accept elimination. That would be the safe choice, allowing her to continue gathering information and perhaps find another opportunity to expose Briggs's deception. Or she could reveal some portion of her true abilities, correct for the sabotage, and advance in the competition, bringing her closer to a direct confrontation with the man who had abandoned her husband to die. With a steady hand that belied the turmoil within, Ellie removed the compromised scope entirely, drawing gasps from the audience. Shooting without a scope at the competition's required distance was considered impossible for all but the most elite marksmen. As she adjusted her stance and prepared for the first shot, she heard Colonel Marshall's voice cut through the sudden silence. "Impossible. That's the Ghost's technique." The words carried enough to reach those nearest to him, including Briggs, whose head snapped around with an expression of disbelief and dawning horror. The atmosphere in the range had transformed in an instant, the previous buzz of conversation giving way to hushed anticipation as Ellie settled into her stance. Without the scope, she was forced to rely on iron sights and years of training that had become muscle memory. Instincts honed through operations where failure meant death, her breathing slowed, the world narrowing to just her, the rifle, and the distant target. Each shot was a prayer for justice, not just for Nathan, but for all those who had been discarded by people like Briggs, deemed expendable because they didn't fit the expected image of strength. The first shot rang out, finding the absolute center of the target with a precision that could not be attributed to luck. The second followed, and the third, each one striking with the same unerring accuracy, forming a tight grouping that even the most experienced competitors had failed to achieve with fully functional scopes. The electronic scoreboard registered the highest point total of the competition, the display flashing to indicate a new record. The silence that followed was profound, broken only when Colonel Marshall rose to his feet, applauding slowly and deliberately. Donovan was the first to recover, his face contorted with indignation. "She cheated," he shouted, advancing toward the officials' table. "This was supposed to be a fair competition, and she's clearly not a beginner." The irony of his protest coming after Ellie had overcome deliberate sabotage was not lost on her. But she remained silent, lowering the rifle and turning to face the growing commotion. Briggs stood frozen, his composure shattered as he stared at her with a mixture of recognition and dread. Colonel Marshall stepped forward, his authoritative presence immediately commanding attention. "I believe introductions may be in order," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of command. "The technique demonstrated by Ms. Morgan is distinctive, a modified standing position developed for special operations where traditional positions were impractical. I've only seen it used effectively by one operator in my career." He turned to Ellie, respect evident in his expression. "Lieutenant Morgan, or perhaps I should say, Ghost. It's been a long time." The revelation sent shockwaves through the crowd. The Ghost was a legend in military circles, a sniper whose operational successes had been classified, but whose reputation had spread through whispered stories. Most had assumed the call sign belonged to a man, part of the mythology that had developed around the mysterious sharpshooter who seemed to appear when the situation was most dire and disappear just as quickly. This is ridiculous, Briggs finally managed, his voice lacking confidence. Lieutenant Morgan was discharged years ago. Her service record is commendable, but hardly legendary. This is clearly some kind of misunderstanding. His protest sounded hollow as Colonel Marshall fixed him with a steady gaze. Is that so, Commander? Perhaps you'd care to share your recollection of Operation North Star, the extraction that went wrong, the decision to leave Specialist Morgan behind despite clear protocols? The color drained from Briggs's face as the colonel's words struck home. Operation North Star had been classified, the details known only to those directly involved. That operation was compromised, Briggs countered, desperation creeping into his tone. Decisions had to be made in the moment. The official inquiry cleared me. He turned to the audience, seeking allies, his ancient history being dredged up to disrupt a competition. It has no place here. But the damage was done. The spectators, many former military themselves, recognized the gravity of what was being implied. Leaving a fellow soldier behind was the ultimate betrayal. Travis stepped forward, his quiet voice carrying in the hushed room. I was there, part of the extraction team that recovered Specialist Morgan's body. What we found didn't match the official report. He hadn't been overwhelmed by enemy forces. He had been shot twice, wounded, but not fatally, and then left exposed. He bled out, waiting for help that should have come from his team leader. Briggs's facade cracked entirely then, his carefully constructed image collapsing under the weight of truth. You don't understand the pressures of command, he snarled. Split-second decisions that determine who lives and who dies. Morgan questioned my authority in front of the team. When the ambush hit, I had to prioritize the mission. That's what we're trained to do. His justification revealed more in its desperate rationalizations than any accusation could. He had admitted, in front of dozens of witnesses, that he had made a choice based on personal grievance rather than operational necessity. In the tense silence that followed, Ellie finally spoke, her voice steady despite her emotions. This isn't about destroying you, Briggs. It's about the truth. Nathan died believing in the principles you claim to uphold: loyalty, honor, protecting your team. He stood up for what was right, even when it wasn't convenient. She paused, letting her words sink in. What happened in Afghanistan was a betrayal, not just of Nathan, but of everything the uniform stands for. You've built your identity on a lie, using the reputation of the SEALs while dishonoring what they truly represent. The challenge that followed was perhaps inevitable. Briggs, cornered and desperate, proposed a final test. One shot, he declared, gesturing to the farthest target on the range. If you're really who they say you are, prove it right here. You and me, Ghost. Let's see if the legend holds up. It was a desperate gambit, a last attempt to salvage his reputation, but as Ellie stepped forward to accept, there was a newfound purpose in her stride, the weight of deception finally lifted from her shoulders. The final showdown held the audience in thrall, the range now silent save for occasional whispers. They stood side by side at the firing line, a study in contrasts, Briggs in expensive tactical gear, posture rigid with fury, and Ellie in simple clothes, calm demeanor belying the moment's significance. The target had been set at an almost impossible distance. Colonel Marshall personally verified the setup, ensuring no sabotage could take place, his presence a reminder of the military principles at stake. Briggs went first, making a show of his preparations. His shot was impressive, landing within the inner ring of the target, drawing appreciative murmurs. It was the kind of performance that had built his reputation, a demonstration of skill that had allowed him to maintain his facade. He turned to Ellie with a smirk, confidence returning. "Your turn, Ghost," he said, the call sign dripping with sarcasm. "Let's see if the legend lives up to the hype." When Ellie stepped up to the line, the transformation was complete. Gone was any pretense of the hesitant beginner. In her place stood the operator who had earned her reputation through countless high-stakes missions. Her movements were economical, precise, each adjustment of her position reflecting years of training and natural talent that couldn't be taught. When she finally took the shot, it was with a certainty that seemed to radiate from her very being. A perfect alignment of body, mind, and purpose. The bullet struck dead center, splitting the inner bullseye with a precision that drew gasps from even the most experienced shooters present. It wasn't just better than Briggs's shot. It was in an entirely different category. The kind of marksmanship that entered into legend. The electronic scoreboard confirmed what everyone had already seen. A perfect score, the first in the competition's history. The silence that followed was profound, broken only when Travis began to applaud, slowly at first and then with increasing vigor. Others joined in, the applause building to a crescendo that echoed through the range. Briggs stood motionless, the last vestiges of his carefully constructed identity visibly crumbling. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its commanding edge, reduced to the raw honesty of a man confronting his own failures. "It was supposed to be a routine extraction," he said, the words emerging as if forced from somewhere deep within. "We had completed the objective, were moving to the rendezvous point when the ambush hit. Nathan was hit first, not critically, but enough to slow him down. I made a call, the wrong call." He looked around at the faces watching him, searching for understanding or perhaps absolution. "I told myself it was about the mission, about getting the intelligence out. But the truth is, I left him because I could, because he had challenged me, made me look weak in front of the team. It was easier to leave him than to risk more to save someone I resented." The admission hung in the air, more damning in its honesty than any accusation could have been. The spectators, many of them former military or law enforcement, turned away one by one, their expressions reflecting disgust, disappointment, or simply a profound disillusionment with someone they had admired. In military culture, there were few transgressions more unforgivable than abandoning a teammate, and to admit that it had been done out of personal animosity rather than operational necessity was to confess to a failure of the most fundamental principles of service. It was in this moment of Briggs's complete unraveling that Ellie demonstrated the true nature of her strength. Rather than pressing her advantage, rather than driving home his humiliation with further accusations or demands, she approached him with a dignity that commanded respect from everyone present. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed range. "I came for the truth, and now it's been spoken." Nathan believed that accountability was the foundation of honor. "Today you've taken that first step." She held out her hand, not in friendship, but in acknowledgement of the painful truth they now shared. "What happens next is up to you, but it should begin with honoring those who have been forgotten." The gesture, unexpected and powerful in its restraint, seemed to break something loose in Briggs. He stared at her outstretched hand for a long moment before accepting it briefly, a flicker of something like respect crossing his features. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "he was right about the approach vector. If I had listened—" He left the thought unfinished, the possibilities of that alternate reality too painful to articulate. With a final nod to Ellie, he turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat, the mythical Commander Briggs replaced by a man confronting the consequences of choices made in moments of fear and pride. As the crowd began to disperse, a small figure pushed through the throng, Sophia, accompanied by Travis, who had apparently arranged for her to witness her mother's moment of vindication. The reunion between mother and daughter was tender, Sophia's pride radiating from her young face as she embraced Ellie tightly. "Dad would have been so proud," she whispered, her words a balm to the wounds that had been reopened during the confrontation. Around them, the applause continued, directed now not just at Ellie's marksmanship, but at the courage and integrity she had demonstrated in facing her past and seeking justice rather than vengeance. Precision was after the events at Precision Elite. The landscape had shifted dramatically. The former shooting range had been transformed under new management, its exclusive focus replaced by a more inclusive approach that welcomed diverse clientele regardless of background. The new sign above the entrance read, "Morgan Precision Training," and the mission statement spoke of building skills, confidence, and community through responsible firearms education. Ellie stood at the center of the main range, observing a class of women as they practiced under Travis's patient guidance. His experience as an instructor had surprised even him. His talent for breaking down complex skills, making him an invaluable partner. Where once he had maintained equipment in the shadows, now he commanded respect as chief training officer, his military experience finally receiving recognition. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Briggs's departure had left a vacuum in the local shooting community, with many initially skeptical of the new approach. But as word spread of the quality of instruction available, even some of the most dedicated Briggsmen had begun to filter in, their resistance giving way to genuine appreciation. In a surprising development, Donovan had become one of their strongest supporters, his tech security firm providing both financial backing and recruits seeking specialized training. The humbling experience at the competition had catalyzed a genuine transformation in the once arrogant CEO. "I built my career around identifying threats," he had told a recent gathering, "but I missed recognizing true expertise when it was right in front of me because it didn't look the way I expected." Colonel Marshall had also remained a presence in Ellie's life, serving as an advisor to the training center. His motivation wasn't merely professional. There was a sense of setting right and institutional failure, of ensuring that the military principles of honor and accountability were upheld. As for Briggs, his story had taken an unexpected turn. He had resurfaced several months later as a student at a veterans rehabilitation center, seeking help for the PTSD he had denied for years. A handwritten letter delivered to Ellie had suggested the beginnings of genuine change. Along with his words of apology had come Nathan's service medals. On this particular day, the inaugural class of the Nathan Morgan Scholarship Program was graduating. 20 veterans and first responders who had received comprehensive training free of charge. Among them was a young female Marine who reminded Ellie of herself. Determined, skilled, but uncertain of her place in a world that judged her on appearances rather than actions. As the ceremony concluded, Ellie addressed them all, her reserve giving way to leadership. "True strength," she told the crowd, "doesn't come from who you are or what you know. It comes from the courage to stand up when you're being overlooked and the integrity to never forget your own value. But more importantly, it comes from recognizing value in others, even when they don't fit your preconceptions of what strength should look like." She touched Nathan's ring, still worn on the chain around her neck. "Each of us has our own shot that can change our lives, not a bullet from a gun, but the moment when you decide to stand up for what's right, even when the whole world doubts you." As Ellie embraced her daughter, the applause was for more than just her words. It was for the journey that had brought her here, for the truth finally acknowledged, and for the strength that had allowed her to seek justice without surrendering to bitterness. In the faces around her, there was a shared understanding that sometimes the most powerful shot of all is the truth that cannot be denied.